Hello, everyone. It's me again. I'm here to just share with you some revision approaches and just a reminder on what you should be doing for your mock exam. Now, do remember that this is a mock, but you still need to take it seriously and you need to just do your best. And there's two things that you can do to make sure that you do your best and get the best grade that you can possibly get in your mock. The first thing is to finish everything. It's a very, very long exam, isn't it? We've got 2.25 hours, and then some people have 25% on top of that, which pushes it close towards 3 hours, which is a really long time. So make sure you use those rest breaks if you're entitled to them. You need to make sure you maintain your concentration throughout. Okay, that's not always easy. But the second thing, and this is kind of where concentration comes into it, is you need to make sure you're doing the right thing for every single question. This exam wants you to do very, very specific things on each of the questions. And we've gone through this several times in class. So today, I'm just going to be revising that with you. There is no new information here. There are no sort of secrets or anything that I've not already told you, but it's just in a really easy format for you to just go through and revise. Okay? So if we have a look at the first slide, remember that we are in section A, and there's two sections to the exam, and we went through this at the beginning of every lesson, if you remember. We have section A and section B. Section A is the reading section, and you have 5 questions in the reading section. Section B is the writing section, and that's worth just as many marks, 45 marks for each section. That's a total of 90 for your whole exam. Okay? Questions 1 to 3 are really, really easy, and you need to try and get through these accurately, cleanly, but also quickly. All right? And we practiced these plenty of times in class, so these should be quite straightforward for us. So if you remember, the questions on 1, 2, and 3 will be on a text that you have never seen before. All right? You can't revise for it, but what you can do is revise the question types that you know that you'll be asked. Question 1 is always the really, really easy question. All right? It's the cut and paste. It's called selection and retrieval of information, but it's just cut and paste, all right? Remember, the first thing you do for every question is you underline keywords in the question, all right? So you know exactly what it is that the question is asking you to do. Question 1 is copy and paste. You go to the relevant section in the text. So if it says between lines 6 and 12, you go to line 6 and 12, and you mark it in your exam, so it's really, really clear, okay? Then what you're going to do is you're going to find 2 words and phrases that answer the question, and you're going to pop them into your response. You can put a third one in. You don't get any marks taken off. So if there's a third option, put it in for safety. It's a good tip. All right. Make sure that you get these marks, and then you just move on to the next one. Very, very straightforward. Okay. And we had to practice a few of these, didn't we? Question 2 is to explain in your own words, and that means you cannot use quotations, all right? You do not need to analyze, you just need to answer the question in your own words. Now, of course, you can use 1 or 2 of the same words in the sentence that you're including in your answer, but you obviously need to remember not to put quotations in. That's important, all right? Direct quotes will not get you marks, okay, for question 2. So, we underline keywords in the question. I'm going to say that a lot today. And what you do is you go through and you just answer the question. It tests how well you can read, understand, and infer. All right. You need to use your own words, and you have to put it in a little paragraph. Okay. You can't put it in bullet points, so no bullet points, please. Okay. I've seen that in a few of your answers. Some of you like to do bullet points. No bullet points, just a paragraph of writing. It's normally worth 4 marks, but it can vary. So just always make sure you try and put one more answer than the number of marks, so you definitely pick up the mark. So if it's a 4-mark question, you put 5 answers. If it's a 5-mark question, you will put 6. So always look at the number of marks available. Okay. Question 3. This is the same as question 2, but we just use quotations this time. Okay. So you answer the question, you underline keywords in the question again. You find the relevant section. So if it's lines 21 to 30, 21, 30, and then you find, I normally just put a little dot next to every answer that I've got. and you can say, I can tell the character is, let's say, excited because they are their heart is racing, and then you can just put the quote in that shows that. All right, that will get you a mark. You just do that 5 times. So this is very, very methodical. You need to make sure you're writing sufficiently, you're writing enough, and that you've got 5 clear marks. If you've got time to drop in a 6th mark, drop it in quickly. It guarantees you'll pick up the marks. Okay, so you need to make sure here, again, no bullet points and relevant quotation for each answer. Okay, so that's questions 1 to 3. We've practiced those about 4 times now, so we should be really, really easy. That should be really straightforward to us. We should know that. Question 4 is where things change. This is where we look at the anthology text. And there's 3 anthology texts that it could be on in your mock. There's the Bhutan text, there's the Explorers or Boys Messing Around text, and there's also the Danger of a Single Story text, all right? It will be one of those 3. I can't tell you which one it will be, all right? So you have to revise all 3. Now you've got resources, and you've also got those little revision sheets for all 3 of those texts. So please make sure you read through them, and please make sure you look at the revision sheets because they will help you. So for question 4, it's all about analysing the language and talking about the techniques, okay, and the impact that they have on the reader. Now, these are P paragraphs. We've done these before. We shouldn't find these too difficult. We did them just the other day in our exam for world literature. So it's just straight up P paragraphs. We find a relevant quote and we talk about what does it show us, what can we infer, what is the impact on the audience, what is the reader trying to show, what does it tell us about this particular world, what techniques are being used, what is the impact of specific words and phrases that the author is using, why have they used those words, okay? So these are the questions we need to be asking ourselves when we are thinking about analysis. There's a visual representation there, okay? And you will have access to all these PowerPoints to go through at your own time, of course. We underline keywords in the question, so we make sure that we understand the question and what they're asking us to do. So it could be, how does the author make this exciting? How does the author show their thoughts and feelings? How does the author show their beliefs? How does the author present them as excitable? How does the author create tension, etc.? So it will always be a question about what is the author doing. So you need to talk about what the author is doing with their language and with their techniques and how they achieve that and what the impact is on the audience. So you must use quotations because it's P paragraphs. That's not an option. You have to use them. Make sure you identify techniques. Try and say as much as you can about each quote. Okay, it's not just like one line, but try and tell me 2 or 3 things about each quotation to develop that analysis. And write in paragraphs, okay? Now, you have to keep an eye on your time here, all right? But I would say around about 3 paragraphs is fine for this question, all right, at this stage. Ideally, you can see there on the slide, we might move up to 4 closer to the exam. But for the mock, I think 3, unless you've got, extra time and you're confident you can finish, it's better to write a good amount for each question than answer one question really well and then miss a question out. So I think 3 paragraphs is a sensible amount for the mock, just for the time being. Remember, we need to talk about the specific impact of the text on the reader. Remember to look at structure as well, okay? And I've put in some words there at the bottom that I've noticed that pupils like to have. So things like this demonstrates, this exemplifies, this shows, the author depicts this as such and such, this presents, this illustrates. Those sorts of words can be really useful for helping just during how to talk about the specific language and structure of the piece. We looked at this and we practiced this in class, okay? So this should be quite straightforward. And there's the exemplar paragraph that we produced using 3 quotes as a class. If you can produce 3 of those, you're going to get a really solid grade in question 4, okay? So remember, we've got our point, we've got our evidence, and everything else in there in the black is actually analysis, all right? So a nice P paragraph there. Now, they're not going to be as developed and as big as they would normally be for, say, a coursework or something. We know that. It's an exam, you're under time pressure, you've got to work quickly. But you shouldn't be struggling to find quotations and find things to think about, but just make sure that you're always answering the question, okay? So for example, this one in my point, it says, Zeppa is able to leave a striking impression of Bhutan through her describing the landscape. All right, and that is answering the question in this specific instance. So you need to make sure your point always answers the question. An easy way to do that is just to rephrase it, isn't it? Okay, that's the mark scheme for question 4. You notice it's not points this time, it's a band, it's a mark scheme. Okay, so if we look at number 3, right in the middle there, you need a clear understanding and the explanation of language and structure and how these are used by the writer to achieve their effects. Selection of references is appropriate and relevant. So are you answering the question? Are you picking relevant quotations? And are you clear about what the quotations show us? If you can do a clear, thorough job, 3P paragraphs, you're going to be in level 3, which is solid at this stage. Right, question 5. This is the horrible one. Now, we need to spend much more time on this, all right? It is a hard question, but I want everyone to have a good go at it, okay? Now, remember, for section B, your writing section, you need to make sure you've got around about 1 hour to 45 minutes left, something within that window. So you need to keep an eye on the clock and make sure you're clear about exactly how long you have left in your exam when you get on to question 5. This is going to be a comparison exercise, which is AO3, explore links and connections between writers' ideas and perspectives, okay? It's the only time you ever assess for this, so it's quite a strange question. It's worth a lot of marks, so you have to have a go at it. And all you have to do is plan your answer by thinking about comparisons between the 2 texts. So one of the texts will be something that you've never seen before, and one will be one that you already know quite well, all right? So your job is to make comparisons. So the first thing we do, underline keywords in the question, all right? Make sure you talk about both the text. It's a comparison. When we compare, we talk about similarities and we talk about differences. You must plan your comparisons. Just a couple of bullet point notes is fine. And again, we want to make about 3 comparisons in this question, eventually moving up to 4, but at this stage in a mock, 3 is good unless you can do more. Remember, you also need to give an example of your comparison from each of the texts. So you will need to put some quotations in and a tiny bit of analysis. Analysis is not the main focus here. Focus more on the comparisons at this stage. You need to write in paragraphs, obviously, and you must make sure you're answering the question, okay? So when you're thinking about comparisons, you need to think about similarities and differences. We practiced this in class, if you remember. And here's an example. The top part, our point this time, is answering the question. It's a comparison. So we've said here, text 1 is a piece of travel writing, describes a person's holiday. Text 2 is an extract from a memoir of a teacher moving to Bhutan for 1 year. They both convey the author's experience of Bhutan, but text 1 is more positive as it's a holiday, and the author of text 2 is nervous because of the duration of her stay. And then we've got an example from text 1, an example from text 2. And you can call them text 1 and text 2 in the actual exam. It's sometimes easier to do that. If you get to the end of the exam and you have finished all your questions, all right, then why not go back and see if you can add to question 4 or 5, because they're the ones that carry a lot of the marks of section A, all right? So if you've finished everything in section B, you should not be finishing the exam early. If you've got extra time, you should use it, because you can always add something to question 4 or always improve your answer for question 5. So remember, for question 5, you don't need an intro, you don't need a conclusion, you don't need them for any of your answers. Sometimes kids like to put a little sentence just to sort of ground them, just to help them answer. That's okay, but you don't need it, all right? Make sure your comparison answers a question, make sure they're meaningful. Don't reuse evidence or avoid reusing evidence that you've already talked about in question 4. And don't just identify techniques, all right? But remember, it's more about the comparison, it's less about analysis. So don't go to town on your analysis. Do that in question 4. So that's a mark scheme for question 5. Again, it's marked in clear bands. It's not marked on a point scheme like questions 1 to 3. So just to recap section A, question 1, cut and paste, easy peasy. Question 2, you're inferring, you're answering the question in your own words, no quotations. Question 3, you're answering the question again. This time, you're using some quotations, no analysis. You don't have to analyze the quotes, you're just putting them in to support. Question 4, when we move on to one of the 3 anthology texts, that's going to be where we actually start doing P paragraphs and we do analysis of language and structure, building up our skills. Question 5 is the comparison between the two texts, and I want you to just do your best and try and create the fullest answer that you can for that, okay? About 3 paragraphs for question 4 and about 3 paragraphs for question 5 is sufficient, and keep an eye on that time, okay? Because you've got very little time in this exam. It sounds long, but actually to finish it, because it's such a long exam, you have to work quite quickly. So let's get rid of this then. And let's go to section B. Now, section B is your writing section, and it's worth half of the exam, okay? So you need to lend yourself at least 45 minutes to 1 hour for this exam. You'll be given 2 writing tasks, and it will be on one of the 3 text types. It will be on a letter, it will be on a speech, or it will be on an article, okay? It'll be one of those 3. So you need to know what those 3 text types look like. Okay, how do you start and sign off a letter? How do you make sure that it looks like an article, put a headline and a sub-article in there? Okay, use a nice, friendly, approaching tone. And in a speech, you write it out as though you're speaking to an audience in front of you. Okay, so you would use maybe some direct address in there, for example. All right, you might say you, or you might say we. Okay, in order to convey your ideas. Pick which one. It will also ask you, you need to think about content, what you can actually write about. So pick a subject out of the 2 that you feel most confident writing about. So one might be about travel, one might be about environmental issues. You might look at that and think, I don't know anything about travel, but I know quite a bit about environmental issues, so I'm going to write about that one. So you need to spend a couple of, maybe a minute or so, just having a look at the 2 prompts and thinking, I could do a good job of that. You've only got 45 minutes to an hour. You're assessed on how well you can produce a task-specific response. So does your, say, article read like an article, and does it do the things that the prompt wants you to do? Also, you are marked for your spelling, punctuation, and grammar, okay? So you need to make sure that you give yourself 5 or 10 minutes at the end to edit very carefully. A couple of things that you really need to make sure you don't do, and that's missing out punctuation. You need to make sure you're writing in clear sentences. Expression is really, really clear, that you're saying exactly what you mean to say. You're not bumbling through your words, and every sentence makes sense. Sometimes you read something back and you think, that's not right. So editing is important, and your capital letters, okay? Now, you are marked for your spelling, but I don't want you to be really restricted and not use any ambitious vocabulary, because you might get a letter in the wrong place, all right? It's better to use some ambitious vocab and sometimes spell it wrong than use really simplistic vocab throughout, all right? So be brave, have a go, and spell it to the best of your abilities. One of the things that you must do is that you plan, okay? And there's the mark scheme there. You'll notice here is that you are marked for how well you can produce a text, and here for your spelling, punctuation, and grammar. So you need to read the prompt carefully, pick which one you want to do, underline keywords in the question, but also use some of the prompts. They often tell you some things that you can write about. So they give you some ideas of what you can do in your structure and what you can do in your paragraphs, all right? So we want clear paragraphing, each paragraph about a different idea. I would spend about 5 to 10 minutes planning. 10 is better than 5. And then write your response carefully, sticking to your plan. If you don't plan and you just go in there, it's very likely that you'll kind of lose focus or lose track of what you're trying to say, or repeat yourself, or your paragraphing will go wrong. You need to have a clear plan before you write. Give yourself 5 minutes to edit at the end. That's very important. Okay, we went through this in class. Some top tips there we went through as well. So I'll let you look at those in your own time. Biggest thing is think about your time management and make sure you're planning carefully. Okay, here's some things that you can do to revise. So you can make sure you understand what the question wants you to do. Understand the approach. How are you going to plan? You've got 10 minutes. Make sure you are underlining keywords in the question, etc. Make sure that you know the difference between the 3 text types: a speech, an article, or a letter that can come up. have a look at some of the exemplars that I've put on here, all right? Maybe do some practice planning. You can practice writing a full response if you want, or maybe just do some plans for the responses that are here. Make sure you are aware of any common grammar mistakes that you make and how to avoid them. Use some ambitious vocabulary, and maybe remember to try and include different types of punctuation, all right? Try and use some colons, semicolons in there as well. It will help your grade for criteria A05. Right then, so here are some ones you can go through to check in your own time, all right? I will give you these 2 PowerPoints. You've got this video, and I'll also give you the 3 revision top sheets for the 3 anthology texts. And that should be everything you need. Just work quickly, work focused, make sure you know what you're doing for each question, and just give me a full response for every question, and you'll be okay, all right? Do keep an eye on your time. Even if you've got extra time, you can't afford to really go very slowly. You have to make sure you keep your eye on the clock. And the most important thing I can tell you is that if you get to around 45 minutes before the end of the exam, you need to move on to section B. Even if you've not finished question 5, you have to move on to section B, because that's worth half of your marks for the exam. So it's really important that you provide a full response for section B. If you've got any questions or any concerns, drop me an email anytime. I wish you all the best of luck. And if I don't see you before, have a lovely holiday. All right. Thanks, guys.